This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt.
I'm Mel.
And I'm Lisa.
And this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. Welcome to Season 9.
So, listeners, I am going to kick us off here, and I will reiterate what Matt just said. Welcome to Season 9. We are back after a summer hiatus. So, if you were kind of wondering where we were there for a while, we took a break for the summer, but we're back because it's getting into fall and spooky season. And so, our first episode for Season 9 is going to be recommendation episode. So we'll be talking about things. I'm going to be talking about 3 things I read over the summer that I enjoyed. I think Lisa might be bringing in some movies. Who knows? One of us may talk about something we're interested in reading that's coming soon or is coming out quite quickly. But that's basically the gist of what we're going to do before we get into our first theme of the season in the next episode. So since I'm kicking us off, I'll go ahead and start the recommendation round robin here. So my first book, I have 3 books. So my first book is The Mystery, The Lost Man by Jane Harper. This is a mystery novel that I have actually talked to Lisa about before. I read this early in the summer and I still think about it a lot. I really enjoyed the character development in this. Also, I just want to say, we are the No Fear Cast. This is a mystery series that's recommended by Stephen King. He blurbs them. So there is kind of a horror aspect to it, but it's a straight up mystery. That's what Jane Harper writes. And the interesting thing about The Lost Man is that it's set in this remote Australian outback. And people have to travel for hours to get from one place to the next. So it's about a family where one of the brothers is found dead in a place where he just would not have been. And they have to figure out if it was suicide, accident, murder. But the thing that I found most interesting and kind of scary too was just the remoteness and the unforgiving nature of the area itself. So the family have different farms or ranches, I guess you would say, but it takes a very long time for them to drive from ranch to ranch. So the one surviving brother hasn't seen his family in months. It takes a while just to get to town. They have to have specially fitted vehicles so that they can cool themselves if the car breaks down. They have to have food and water, extra tires, repair materials. I mean, every time you leave your house, basically, you have to be prepared that if anything happens to the car, you can survive until someone can come get you. And you have to use a radio to communicate with people because there's not a lot of communication in the area. So basically, there's a memorial to someone in the past who has died in these terrible circumstances. And the very beginning of the book is this man, one of the brothers in the family, is found dead at that memorial. And this brings the other brothers, the ones who have survived, kind of back together. And then you gradually kind of learn the family's history and their place in the surrounding area throughout the course of the book as you try to, and they try to, figure out what happened. And like I mentioned earlier, I think the thing I really liked about this book is the character development. Like I felt like I really knew the characters and I really cared about them. And the red herrings kind of got me because I'm like, oh no, I hope it's not, so and so. But yeah, and like I said, even though I read it like right at the beginning of the summer, like right after I finished up my spring semester, I still think about it every now and then because it was just so. I don't know, the issues they were having to deal with just in the surroundings and the settings were striking, in addition to the issues they were having to deal with each other and their relationships. That kind of caused this mystery to happen. So that's The Lost Man by Jane Harper. I know she has other books. She has like a 2 or 3 book series that also takes place in Australia, but I haven't gotten to those yet. That's the only one of hers that I've read so far.
Mel, you talked so highly about Jane Harper that my mother-in-law, who is Australian, actually sent me a copy of another Jane Harper book, The Dry. which I haven't read yet, so I can't recommend it, but I'm really excited to read it. And now listening to you talk again about this one, I really think I might have to put it up to the top of my list. So I don't know. I'm really excited that Jane Harper is a new author to me. So I'm excited to dive into her stuff. I love a good mystery. I will say, listeners, I apologize if you hear dog noises in the background. I'm in my home office and I've got 2 dogs at my feet, and one of them is chewing loudly on a toy that I feel bad taking away from him, so I'm not going to do it. But I will tell you about my recommendation, which I just actually finished this book last night. It's The Night Guest by, and I'm going to butcher this name. I've tried to pronounce it correctly, but it's Icelandic, and I can't pronounce any of the names in this book if I tried. It's my southern accent won't let me, but it's by Hildur Knutsdottir. And it's about this woman who she has just been constantly not feeling well, and she's been really fatigued, and she's been going to doctors to try to figure out what's going on with her and like why she's so tired all the time. Um Plus she's been waking up with like injuries on her body, like mysterious bruises that she doesn't know like where they came from, or sometimes what looks like she might have like injured herself on something by like, hitting something. And she doesn't know, she has no memory of any of this, having any of these injuries. So she goes to various doctors and she goes and talks to her like her friends and family, and they're all concerned. And basically they're all kind of telling her the same thing, which is like, have you tried drinking more water and not drinking coffee? Have you tried eating better? Have you tried exercise? And she's just kind of at her wit's end, because she's like, I've tried these things, or I don't think they'll help. But anyway, she goes and buys a fancy watch that has a pedometer on it. She tells herself, I'm going to walk 10,000 steps a day and call that my exercise, and I'm going to see if I start sleeping better at night. Like, I'm at least going to give this a try. But she finds when she wakes up that it's not at the like 10,000 steps she reached. Instead, it's like at 40,000 steps or like 35,000 steps. And she's like, where did all these extra steps come from? And so that's kind of the like entryway into the book. And it goes into some really unexpected places. I think there were actually 2 points in this book where I audibly gasped when I was reading it, because I was just like, what? So I'm really dying to have either you, Mel, or you, Matt, or maybe both of you read it so I can discuss the like ending of it too, because I just need to talk to somebody about it. It's a really quick read. I've heard some people call it a novella. I don't know if it's actually novella length or if it's just a short novel, but it's very, very quickly paced, and it's a good mystery, and it's got some really good moments of horror. I read a lot of horror. I watch a lot of horror, but I will say that there was one scene in the book that I flinched. But that might have been just a personal trigger for me too, so I don't know. But anyway, it's called The Night Guest, and I really enjoyed it. So I'm going to talk about this book for a while. And yes, I need both of my co-hosts on this podcast to read it so that they can talk about it with me. Because I don't want to just talk to myself about it anymore.
Well, that definitely sounds fascinating, and I've been taking some notes. And I have definitely added that to my to be read list. I can't guarantee when it will make it to the actively reading, but hopefully sooner rather than later, because that does sound really good. So for my first recommendation, I believe this might be one that Lisa has recommended previously. I know we've talked about it at least on this podcast, but I just recently read it. I finished it maybe a month or so ago. But it's the novel Whale. Let me try to pronounce it. Whale Fall by Daniel Kraus. And for those of you that are not familiar with the book, I wouldn't call it a straightforward horror novel, but it definitely has horrific elements to it. But the basic premise is a teenager whose dad has recently passed away. I want to say it's within a year or so of his father's death. His father was a diver by trade and by, I guess, um, passion as well. But also, they had a very strained relationship throughout his life. That the kid was, he's the only boy of the children, and his father wants him to be, just like him, and yet he's he's not, and so they have a very strained relationship, and the entirety of the novel takes place as he's essentially going to try to find his father's body because there's I don't want to give too many spoilers for different things, but his father had committed suicide while out diving. And so he says that he tells himself he's going to go find his father's body. He's going to dive again. He hasn't done any diving in years. And it's a very dangerous place that he's going diving. And he ends up accidentally swallowed by a whale. And to just say it like that sounds just absolutely incredible in the truest meaning of that word, like as in unbelievable. But the way that it leads up to him being swallowed, it's actually remarkably realistic, the way that it happens. So I was a little hesitant at first reading the book. Like I was enjoying the book, but I was like, I mean, this is a book set in the current era. Like it references the COVID pandemic, and it's about a guy getting swallowed by a whale, but it actually works. And there is quite a bit of it's a claustrophobic novel in every sense of the word. Even before he ends up in the whale's stomach, like you're in his head the entire time, and it's very descriptive on the feelings that he's feeling both physically and emotionally. There's lots of flashbacks to his to the past, where different scenes and moments between him and his father mostly, but other things as well. And I mean, I kind of almost liken it in a lot of ways to the claustrophobia that you feel if you've ever read the book Johnny Got His Gun, which was that great World War One novel about the soldier who's wounded and is blind, deaf, and has lost all of his limbs and is basically trapped inside of his body. This is not quite to that level, but I mean, we as the reader do still end up pretty much with him for the entire time. And let me just say, he goes through quite a bit. It's very obvious that the author did their research on what would happen if somebody were to accidentally end up inside of a whale. It's very descriptive, but not in any sort of overly gross or gag inducing way. I was also kind of worried about that. Once I got to the part where he was actually swallowed by the whale, I kind of stopped reading for the day and was like, I don't know if I want to keep going because I'm worried that I won't, like, that there'll be just too much body horror kind of for me. But then I picked it up the next day and finished the book within a couple of days. So um, it's a long way of saying Whalefall. It's actually it's a tremendous book, and there's lots of emotional moments, and as well as some very very claustrophobic, uncomfortable being swallowed by an animal moments as well. So Whalefall by Daniel Krauss is my first recommendation.
I have not read Whalefall, but it's been on my radar, so I'm gonna have to add it to my to be read. And also, Lisa, now that I've heard you talk about the Night Guest again, I was actually in my Libby app putting a little notification on it to let me know when it's available because I'm very intrigued by that one too. My second book is a book that's been recommended a lot by a lot of people, and that is The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. We've talked about Tananarive Due on this podcast before. We're all three fans. Um, And in this book, she returns to her fictional town, from the collection of stories Ghost Summer, so Gracetown. And in Gracetown, when you're a young person, when you're a child, until you hit a certain age, you can see the ghosts that haunt the place. And the ghosts that haunt the place are related to the dark history behind the town. And so the Reformatory is a novel, that tells a story, of another haunted place, and that is the Reformatory of the title. And I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm going to read kind of the back of the book part and then talk just a little bit about what struck me when I read this over the summer. It's June 1950. 12-year-old Robbie Stevens Jr. is sentenced to 6 months at the Gracetown School for Boys, a reformatory, for kicking the son of the largest landowner in town in defense of his older sister, Gloria. And so begins Robbie's journey further into the terrors of the Jim Crow South and the very real horror of the school they call a reformatory. Robbie has a talent for seeing ghosts, but what once was a comfort to him after the loss of his mother has become a window to the truth of what happens at the reformatory. But the ghosts Robbie sees hint at worse things. Through his friends Redbone and Blue, Robbie is learning not just the rules, but how to survive. And meanwhile, Gloria is rallying every family member in connection in Florida to find a way to get Robbie out before it's too late. And The Reformatory is a haunting work of historical fiction written as only American Book Award winning author Tanari Abdu could, by piecing together the life of the relative and her family never spoke of and bringing his tragedy and those of so many others at the infamous Dozier School for Boys to light. So there is, an aspect of family history and Florida history at the heart of this fictionalized narrative. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting about the Reformatory was the way that Dew used the hauntings to communicate the history, and the way that as Robbie negotiates this hell of the Reformatory, the ghosts that he sees or the hauntings that he sees are basically things from the past that keep happening into the present because they're just so traumatic, and so disturbing. And so part of the idea of the book is also like bringing those things to light in addition to dealing with them in the present day of the book. And I it's a hard book to read, but it's also a page turner. And like I said, one of the things that I enjoy about horror fiction and supernatural fiction in particular is how it can be linked to history in really interesting and really important ways. And I think Tananarive Dew's Reformatory does that in spades.
The Reformatory was another one of those that I very nearly put on my recommendation list because it was I mean, it is one of my favorite books I've read this year. I think the only reason I didn't include it is because, well, Mel, I kind of figured you might, but also, that was a tough read for me. I had to put it down several times and walk away, and um, just by the very subject matter, but it's still an incredible book. Well, my second recommendation is actually a 2 for 1. I recently saw 2 movies in the movie theater, and, both of them were debut films, like debut directors, and I won't say they're perfect films, but both of them made me excited to see what the directors were gonna do next time. So the first one, and I don't know, maybe my favorite of the 2 was Blink Twice, which was that movie that starred Channing Tatum, and, it was written and directed by Zoe Kravitz, and I don't know, it had a really interesting she has a really interesting visual style that I was impressed by. I think she talked about being inspired by, like, The Shining in particular was one that she said that she was looking at, and, I mean, I'll be honest, Blink Twice is not The Shining. Um, but I could see where she was, like, pulling images from, and it was interesting to see it, but it was also just a really interesting movie too. It's about this guy who's like this big billionaire basically, and he owns a private island, and he invites these 2 girls, these friends, to come to his island and just kind of experience the good life for a while, and things just start going downhill from there. They start kind of losing track of time, and um, you're really not, everything's kind of a haze, but you're not sure if it's because like they're just being handed like alcohol and constantly, and it's kind of a one stop, like nonstop party. um and so they kind of start to lose track. They're asking each other, what day is it again, that kind of thing. And then it keeps just delving into nightmare territory. So that one was really a fun watch. It reminded me a lot too of something like Ready or Not, which was the one about the girl who gets married and um, has to play hide and seek with like her eccentric, like really uber wealthy relatives. There were moments of that I kind of noticed, which were fun because I really love that movie. So that was Blink Twice. And then the other one was The Front Room, which stars Brandy, who I don't remember seeing her since like the 90s. So it was fun to watch her in something. But this one is an A24 movie that was done by Sam and Max Eggers, who are Robert Eggers' brothers. So, of course, I'm a big fan, probably like most of our listeners, of Robert Eggers, who did like The Witch and those movies. This one is not a historical like drama horror movie in the way um the other Eggers is. This one is different. But it's based on a short story by Susan Hill, who is a favorite author of mine. So that was kind of fun to see. And it's got a lot of like religious um trauma in it. It's got some pregnancy horror in it. It's got some racial horror in it. It's got a lot that was really, really interesting to watch, but it's basically about this couple um, who are married and expecting a baby, and they're kind of struggling with finances. Um, and they're told, like, basically all their financial situation will be taken care of if they take in the husband's stepmother. And he's been estranged from her for many, many reasons. And but she's like, look, you can have all my money if you take me in and let me live in your house. And so they end up saying yes. And then things just, go to hell from that point. So it was a really interesting movie. Again, really interesting visuals. I would be intrigued to see what else they have next, or what else they do next. Like I said, it wasn't a perfect movie, but it was intriguing. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see what these new directors do in the future, because I have a feeling we'll be seeing something from all of them in the future. So that's my second recommendation.
Well, thanks, Lisa. That sounds good. I may have to check this out. So, my next recommendation is it's a novel that has also been adapted into a TV series. I'm going to limit my comments just to the novel. I have not watched the TV adaptation of it yet, so can't comment on the accuracy of the adaptation or anything like that. But it is now on my list of things that I'm going to watch. But my next one, it's a Chinese novel. It's called The Three Body Problem. Obviously, that's the English translation. And I will do my best to pronounce the author's name. I believe it's Cixin Liu. Um, and this was adapted into a TV series for Netflix. I've heard sort of mixed reviews about the TV show, but a lot of the reviews basically said that um, part of the reason why it was getting mixed reviews is that it was an attempt to adapt a book that is in a lot of ways unadaptable for the screen, and that words like that intrigue me. So I A few months ago, I happened to be on a flight and I had a couple of books lined up. I was actually had not started something new, and I I had another one that was a little bit lighter fare that, like, I read, like, the first 2 pages of and was like, "Ah, I know this is, like, perfect for, like, plane travel reading, but it's just not hooking me." So I started The Three Body Problem, and it's definitely not what you would call a beach read. It's not like your typical traveling on an airplane book to read. It's a lot more heady than that, but I very much enjoyed it. It is it is science fiction, it is a little political commentary, it is all over the place, in a really cool way. But the basic story, there's kind of 2 intersecting stories, one that begins during the Cultural Revolution in China under Mao Zedong that, uh, had lots of, mm, I don't know the polite way to say lots of murders, but that's basically that's kind of how the novel opens. Is there is a physics professor at a university who's essentially murdered by a mob of people who were part of the Cultural Revolution because academics and professors in general were seen as dangerous because they were Western and Westernized, and they were against the communist revolution, and they were not for the people, and all of these sorts of things. And his daughter is there, witnesses his murder, and ends up going. She's also she's like not a child. I should specify, like she's a young woman. She's in her 20s. So she was actually an academic herself, I believe, a grad student, and through a twist of fate, or even kind of mercy, ends up being taken to a very remote observation station by the Chinese government, because someone in the military kind of helps get her out of there, and takes her there basically so that she doesn't also get killed. The other story involves the present day, where there's a nanotechnology professor who is enlisted by a police detective to try to figure out what is happening with a rash of suicides amongst academics, particularly people in the sciences, physics, nanotechnology, all of those sorts of fields. There've been a lot of people that have committed suicide, and it's very strange. And I I'm realizing now that I'm trying to describe this book out loud, how hard it is to describe, and that's exactly why it was called Unadaptable, because part of what it is about is that this nanotechnology professor discovers this virtual game that involves an alien world that's in a sort of unstable orbit with 3 stars, and the 3 stars, the way the orbit works is very unpredictable, so they may have times of stability where everything is fine, but then as the orbits change, they may be too close to one star or 2 stars at a time, and the climate becomes unlivable. It becomes too hot, or they gets too far away from the stars, and it's too cold for them to exist. You come to find out this is actually a reenactment of an actual alien planet. And I won't go into too much more detail because there are a lot of revelations that you have to be along the entire ride of the novel's plot to really have the wow moment. But suffice to say, it's I feel I hope I'm doing it justice, but suffice to say, it's a very heady book, but man, it's really good, and it does have some really good, like, it hooks you in as well with action as well. It's not just all talk and high-minded physics and things like that. That apparent I googled it while I was reading, and the three-body problem is an actual physics problem involving, uh, uh, like I said, a planet that's in orbit with 3 stars, and essentially you can't it's not predictable. And so, instead of like us where we have a 24-hour night day system, there's no way, like, it's literally impossible to predict when things will be stable and safe and when things will be unstable and unsafe for the aliens on the planet. So, anyway, I feel like I'm starting to ramble, but the three-body problem, it's really excellent. It hooked me in, and, I mean, I've finished it's a pretty thick book, and I just, like, devoured it from start to finish, and, hopefully I'm doing it justice, but, those of you who are fellow nerds that like the sci-fi leaning stuff, you should definitely check it out if you haven't.
Yeah, that's another one that I've thought a lot about reading and just haven't gotten to yet. So, every time we do these episodes, you guys just load me up on new stuff that that I've thought about reading, and it pushes me over the edge or I haven't heard of even, and I decide I need to check it out. All right, so this is my last recommendation, and uh, listeners who also listen to the Monster She Wrote podcast will have heard a little bit of this before, but that is that in the past, like 9 months or so, it seems like I've gone on like a mini Simone St. James reading marathon. I still haven't gotten to Sundown Motel, which I know is like her most well known one. But last fall, in preparation for scary Halloween season, I listened to St. James's The Haunting of Maddie Clare, which is a wonderful kind of occult detective story. And I've also listened to the Book of Cold Cases, which is an excellent kind of dual narrative, true crime type mystery story. And I listened to her kind of novella, long short story, Ghost 19, which is just a straight up ghost story. And by listening to interviews with her, I learned that her career originally started out as kind of a ghost story writer. And so I've since acquired her books from earlier in her career, an Inquiry into Love and Death, and Silence for the Dead, which I intend to read at some point. Um, and even like the Book of Cold Cases has a little bit of ghosty stuff in it if you're into that. But the stuff that she writes now seems to be really kind of mystery thriller with sometimes a supernatural aspect thrown in. And so I feel bad it took me so long to get to her. We all come to books in the time we need to, I think. But I'm like, I've loved ghost stories for so long, and I'm just now kind of getting into her work. And her new book came out a few months ago, Murder Road, and I read it, and it's another one that's kind of stuck with me that I think about every now and then. In Murder Road, you basically have a young couple. They've just gotten married. They're headed to their honeymoon. They're trying to find a resort. It's late at night. They somehow end up on the wrong road. That's part of what they have to figure out as the course of the book goes. And they don't quite understand how they got on this road or where they're going. And while they're trying to figure out if they need to turn around or not, they see a hitchhiker. They pick the hitchhiker up. The hitchhiker is injured. They take the hitchhiker to a hospital, and they unwittingly become suspects in a crime that they did not commit, but they also can't really explain why they were there because of the weird way that they ended up on this road. And so apparently, this road is like one of the most dangerous roads in America. Nobody really wants to drive down it because terrible things happen on it all the time. But April and Eddie, our intrepid couple, decide that they need to solve this mystery before they can leave because they have to clear their names. And then two, they just want to find out what happened because there seems to be a pattern, a history of hitchhikers being killed on this road, and no one's ever been able to figure out what was causing it. And so you have a kind of classic mystery thriller, but there's a little bit of a supernatural aspect to it too, which I very much enjoyed. Um, And so, yeah, I know Matt, you like Sunset Motel, if I'm remembering correctly, and I put that on my TBR because you had recommended it. But I seem to have kind of zigzagged my way into her more supernatural books, and I'm really enjoying her stuff. So I'm going to be reading more of her ghost stories probably this fall. But that's Murder Road by Simone St. James.
Man, these are some really good recommendations. I also would like to read Murder Road. I've read some Simone St. James. We've talked about this before, Mel, but I haven't read that one. And yeah, I'm excited to do it. My last recommendation is a collection of short stories. It's Midwestern Gothic by Scott Thomas. It's coming out this month, September. I don't know the exact date, but I got an early copy of it and I really like it. They are nice, creepy stories, and they're all set as the as the title suggests, in the Midwest. Very very gothic feel to a lot of them. So yeah, I really enjoyed these stories. I enjoyed this book, and yeah, I'm hoping we can rope him into getting on the podcast and talking about it actually, because we talk about like the Gothic a lot, or we talk about like Southern Gothic, but I love it when it's Gothic that's in another place that we don't often get. So in this case, Midwestern Gothic. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I hope a lot of people pick that book up.
Well, I find it shocking that you, of all people, would recommend something gothic. That's just so out of character for you, Lisa. um, well, I will wrap us up here with my final recommendation. And I was saving this one for last for a reason. This is probably, of the three recommendations, probably my highest recommendation. I feel like all three of the books that I'm recommending are definite A's, but this one, um, it was just stellar, A plus. But before I get into talking about it, I should tell you what it is called. It's the latest book by Paul Tremblay. It's called Horror Movie. And if you're not familiar with the novel, if you haven't read it yet and don't know the summary, I will definitely keep it spoiler free here. But um, it basically, Paul Tremblay, his works always seem to tackle different genres of horror. Like he wrote a vampire novel, he's written a zombie novel, he's written a possession novel, but all of these are very unique takes on the different tropes. It's not your standard vampire novel. It's not your standard zombie, etc. And this one, he's tackling kind of the idea. It's kind of more of a subgenre of a cursed film, and the basic structure of the book is about a film that was made by some I believe they were just out of college students, like they had just graduated kind of thing, in I believe it was the early 90s. I want to say like 92, 93, and it was written co-written by the director and one of the stars of the movie, and it's a very odd kind of offbeat horror movie with the title Horror Movie. It's kind of meant to be a low budget movie, but they're artists and auteurs, and they have an idea for this horror movie, and part of it is that they want to film it most of the scenes in this abandoned school that's set to be demolished at the end of the summer that they're filming the movie, and so they kind of have this time limit, and they don't tell you outright all of the details, but suffice to say, some things happened and went wrong during the filming of the movie. The movie itself was never fully, like, the filming was finished for the most part, but it was never edited. It was never attempted to be released until many, 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 many years later, when the director uploaded, I believe it was two or three scenes to YouTube along with the entire script. And so now it's roughly 30 years after the original, and Hollywood is kind of doing a trying to do a remake of this movie and have tapped the only surviving member of the film at this point, um, who played a role in the movie to reprise his role in some ways. And so the the book kind of ping pongs between present day and the filming of the movie, and goes in sort of chronological order of how they filmed the movie, as he's also sort of re reliving things through this remake of the film that he's involved in. And I don't want to give much more detail than that because I feel like if I do, there will be spoilers. But it's just excellent. I could not put this book down. I just if I said that I devoured the Three Body Problem, this like I ate without even like chewing. I just like opened it and swallowed it whole. It was so good, and I've always loved Tremblay. I think ever since the first book I read by him, and all of his other books since then have been very good. But I feel like my favorite of his was the first book I read, Head Full of Ghosts, and I personally would put Horror Movie up there with Head Full of Ghosts as probably one of my favorite of his works. And I certainly don't mean to diminish his other books because I have very much enjoyed those as well. But Horror Movie, I definitely feel is it's just really really good. And I know we were talking before we started recording here, and I know Lisa said that she has not gotten it yet, but is planning to. I definitely recommend that you get it. It's really really good, and there's a lot of just like most of his other works, there's a lot of psychological horror that happens in the book. And some of it has to do with the filming of the horror movie and how there are these moments of like violence almost that are normalized. And as they shoot some of these dark scenes that they have written out. And again, I don't want to give too much detail because I don't want to spoil it for anyone. So I'm going to kind of put a pin in it and just say, if you like Paul Tremblay, if you've read his other books, even if you haven't read his other books, if this sounds like something even vaguely interesting to you, I highly recommend it. It's probably my favorite thing I've read so far this year. So, Paul Tremblay's Horror Movie. Walk, don't run, but go get it, I guess. And so I guess that kind of brings us to a close here. I know we typically do this round robin of about 3 recommendations each. So I guess I will just go ahead and kind of close out this episode. Just wanted to go back to what Mel said at the beginning. I'm so excited to be back here for our 9th season. It's definitely, it kind of blows my mind that we've been doing this for 9 years at this point. Still going strong, and excited to be back. I think we've got some good stuff lined up, and I think we're all excited to be back here. So just starting with our typical closing, just to remind you, we are at No Fearcast on X and Instagram, and we also have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you love what we're doing, consider looking us up and supporting us on Patreon. We also have merchandise available at our website, nofearcast.com, or simply rate and review us. It's entirely free, but it does help other listeners find us. Our theme music is by Nicholas Gasparini, and as always, we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.